time, because we've got a lot to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So thank you, everybody, for coming, particularly our guests today. If you've never been on one of our audit chats before, this is where the C. Aubrey Smith Center here at the University of Texas takes some pressing issue of the day. Sometimes it's specifically academic, sometimes it's more practice oriented. And we try to bring on experts on the topic to help inform the discussion that's already happening in the field. Today's topic, as you probably know, is the move from a 150-hour rule to pass and sit for this to become a CPA once you've passed the CPA exam to a 120-hour rule, this alternative pathway for CPA licensure. It's something that's affecting, I think, all of our schools. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of trial runs yet because my understanding is that the first states where this was effective are only just now effective. And so we don't have any real look back period in any states to see how this is run. But in the absence of that, what we do have is 3 excellent guests to help us forecast and understand how this is going to work, what the impetus for it was, et cetera. So I'm going to, for the most part, let our 3 guests introduce themselves. We've got 2 Marks here, which is going to be a little bit confusing. Most of you probably know Mark Beasley, who's at NC State and is a fellow academic. But Mark Gibbonus is a audit practice partner at Grant Thornton. And then we have Taylor as well, who is he runs the Austin office for Ernst & Young. So that's as much introduction as I'm going to do for them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Taylor, if you don't mind. Just kick us off. Right. What's your connection to this topic? What's your professional background? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to meet everyone virtually. Taylor Sisson, I'm an audit partner by nature. Grew up in our Austin office and have been here my entire career.
Macombs grad.
Macombs grad, yep. UT grad, proud UT supporter and sports supporter as well. My managing partner of our Austin office as well as leading up our assurance efforts for the U.S. For private companies. So see a lot of different night jobs for EY is what I call them. My relation to this is I was part of, and I'm glad we're doing this virtually so nobody can throw tomatoes at me. So just as a heads up, I was part of all the Big Four were involved, as you can imagine, or lobbying to make this happen across all the 50 states. And I was the EY representative for Texas that did that and worked with the legislature and whatnot to get that passed. Now, as I caveat that, I will say if it wasn't me, it was me because it was in Austin and our capital was in Austin. It wasn't me because this is a passion of mine to make this happen. So if it wasn't me, it was going to be somebody else from EY. I drew the short straw of being local. So great to meet everybody and look forward to any and all questions that you have. Happy to.
And let me just say that Taylor made a reference to some tomato throwing. It is a goal of these audit chats in general, not just for this particular topic, to get people on opposing sides of a topic to have a meaningful debate about that topic. And in this particular case, I think it's pretty easy to guess how a lot of this crowd is going to feel about this change. And so I just want to especially thank Taylor for coming onto this call. We really need informed debate that comes at it from both sides of a topic. And sometimes that can be hard to do, particularly in a case where much of the audience probably comes down one way. So thank you so much for being on this call. We really do appreciate it. All right, so let's go to our other practicing audit partner. Mark, do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So Mark Gibbonus is my name, and I'm an audit partner with Grant Thornton in Houston. I sit in their Houston office. I actually grew up and went to school in Canada. So my path I'm a CPA. I've been a CPA for over 20 years. So my path to CPA was a little bit different. I actually had to have my transcripts evaluated by the University of Texas to make sure that I had all the right credentials, and it was kind of non-traditional. So I ended up with over 160 hours, and I was a little nervous. Did I have enough? Did I have enough of the accounting curriculum and whatnot? And it was fine. So once all that dust was settled, I zoned in on the exam and passed it all 4 parts in the first try. So that was pretty amazing. So as a practicing auditor, my connection to this is I'm pretty heavily involved in our recruiting process. I'm a campus champion for a couple of Texas schools, and I'm getting these questions from students. So I want to stay informed, and I want to be able to provide them with good quality information. And I think this discussion today will provide some insight to that. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And then lastly, our academic on the panel here, Mark Beasley, if you don't mind just giving us the same sort of short introduction.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Mark Beasley. I'm a professor in the Poole College of Management at North Carolina State University, where I've been on faculty I'm in my 32nd year. Before that, it's been a stint in practice with Taylor's firm. And I teach in our Master's of Accounting program and MBA program. I guess, tie into this particular topic, in addition to just the professor role, is I'm the president of the American Accounting Association. And back in 2024, when I was president-elect, I was asked by the AAA to be on a joint task force working group between NASBA and the AICPA to explore an alternative pathway model that would be a competency-based framework to replace the 30 extra hours. So it'd be 120 plus this competency framework. And so I think that experience, because I was asked to do that, will tie into, I think, what we're going to talk about today. And some of the perspectives I heard on that call were pretty interesting. That group were interesting that I can shed some insight on.
Great. So just some logistics now that we know our panelists. I've got a set of questions and a dialogue that I intend to have with our panelists here for the first part of the call. And then at the end of the call, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. Those questions can come either in the form of a raised hand, or you can submit them via chat. You can submit them via chat at any time. Jamie is working diligently in the background, keeping track of all of this. So she's going to help facilitate the questioning process. And feel free to have a sidebar discussion about any topics that come up in the chat as well. Okay, so Mark Beasley, let's start with you. So you were obviously privy to some of the behind the scenes discussion about this change. Can you give us some color on what the impetus for the change was? Typically, what sorts of arguments for and against did you hear in that process? And where did you ultimately come down personally on that decision?
Okay. Yeah, so again, this was a joint task force between NASBA and the AICPA that initially we were tasked with coming up with some other model to replace the 30 additional credit hours that ultimately the task force started working on a competency-based framework. So the bottom line here is to say a person could get 120 hours, and then through work experience, 2 years, then there would be some competency elements that they would work under the supervision of CPA, and they would be then assessed based on that competency framework to say, yes, your 2 years would be in essence equivalent to the 30 hours. So it was a pathway to allow people to have a bachelor's degree and 2 years of work experience in this competency-based framework. That was issued as an exposure draft in September of 24, and then with a period ending in December of 24. To back up, why did that task force get created? And I think it was because of the move already beginning to happen in certain states where they were moving away from the 30 additional hours and just going back to a 120. And I think the real motivation was mobility, that the firm started getting very nervous about if some states require the 150 and others only a 120, how will we deal with mobility of a licensing, particularly in today's environment where Mark and Taylor sit in Austin, but may have a client in Philadelphia. And so how do I operate as a CPA in another state that may not say I'm licensable in their rules? So mobility was the motivator. But very quickly, that working group, which let me add, the working group, interestingly, mostly had executive directors of state societies or AICPA or NASBA employees. I can only remember a couple of firm people, but they were in the L&E group, not practicing CPAs like Mark and Taylor. And I think that was interesting for me is the drivers were not CPAs. There was one other academic on the call, on the working group, in addition to me. But anyway, so mobility was the driver. But then what really started being a lot of the conversation was cost. This is a way to make it less costly for people to enter into the profession. So pipeline concerns of we need to get people into the firms. And so there was definitely concern, particularly from the smaller firms and smaller states, as in executive directors of some more rural states where the trying to get people to come into the field were more challenging. So they were saying, okay, the cost of graduate or 30 additional hours is costly. This will allow people to have less investment in their education. And then the other piece that to me, for this call, the colleagues on the call, that was most concerning to me was the general description, I would say, among that group about their views of the educational value of that 30 hours. It was a very skeptical, in my summary, my takeaway was it was a very skeptical group that they did not think that the 30 hours was adding any value. And in a lot of cases, they felt like people were um, getting 30 hours by taking a lot of PE classes, just stuffing it with whatever to get 30 hours.
PE is physical education,
Physical
not private
education,
equity.
yes, yes.
Private equity classes. Okay.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, very big difference. So there was this view that, people are just taking fluff. There's no value to it. There was also a lot of criticism about college classes being very theoretical, not practical, just lecture based. So what that
I
was
assume, Mark, you disillusioned those panelists of
I,
that opinion.
I, I, I had to push back a lot. One, saying that is not my experience as far as what we're seeing people do, as far as taking classes. Number two, I started talking through, our focus here at NC State is obviously really building the professionalism skills, business acumen, critical thinking. The maturity of that fifth year, the students that we see is tremendous. But I think part of the challenge, and I sort of had to tactfully say a few times to the group on the call, they probably had not, based on looking at their Zoom screens, I could tell they probably had been in a classroom in a really long time, like decades. And
Yes.
so they were judging today's curriculum against the 1980s and 90s curriculum. But it was frustrating to hear that, I guess is the way, because I felt like it was not being fair to what I know and what I hear a lot of people are doing in their classrooms, that pretty innovative kind of work. So that it was disappointing in that regard.
And then, Mark, can you just briefly tell us how you came down on this? Was the ultimate decision made as a vote? Did you vote in that case? How was the ultimate decision made?
Very interesting question, Nick. I don't recall a vote. I quite frankly, the more I was on these working group calls, the more I concluded the decision had already been made. We were just there to document it, to be quite frank. I was very vocal in my view, and here's my view, that and I kept trying to articulate that one, I think the college classroom experience is very different. I think that fifth year adds tremendous value to make these people more successful long term. But I kept coming back to the bottom line of just simply thinking about it in an environment today that when we first started passing this 30-hour requirement in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had one auditing standards board, basically the FASB. We did not have Sarbanes-Oxley. We really weren't talking data analytics or technology of any significance. Fast forward to 25 years later, we've got multiple auditing standards that are multiple accounting standards. We have now SOX, we have sustainability reporting, we have AI, we have data analytics. And I was like, how are we as a profession arguing that less education is better when the world is so much more complex than when all of us went through?
So
I did not win the day on that, but that was how I kept trying to position my thoughts on that.
So, Mark, I'm going to pick up there and sort of frame a question to our practicing participants here. So, I'm going to quote you back to yourself and to the rest of the panel here. I think you said you're convinced that that fifth year adds value. That was the term you used. It adds value.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, if it does truly add value, should we just let the market decide how much value it adds and sort of let it work? I mean, why the mandate? Why do we have this mandate? If it does in fact add value, and practicing auditors should be able to see it. So for Mark and Taylor, does it add value? Like, what do you see as the future of this master's level education in the hiring plans of your respective firms? How does that map into some set of incentives to continue to get that additional year, or not? In which case, it sort of may wither on the vine. Taylor, why don't you go first?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's no question it adds value, and we will continue to recruit heavily master's students. I think all things being equal, when we're looking at two candidates and one has a year's additional worth of experience and whatnot from a education standpoint, I think that's a no-brainer for us from a hiring standpoint. I think ultimately, couple thoughts. One, Mark hit on really well is the whole issue of reciprocity and how the firms started getting concerned about that. And because to your point, Mark, some of these legislatures meet at different time frames, like in Texas, they meet every 2 years. So if it didn't happen this past year, we'd have to wait 2 years for that to get passed. Other states were passing it. How would that work from working in different locations? And that was a big concern for all the firms. But getting back to your question, Nick, yes, I think from our perspective, we still highly value the master's degree. It gives you, a full year of additional classes, specifically in those majors that we're looking to hire. That 120 hours, you're not getting a ton of deep dives into audit and tax and some of the other measures. So yes, long story short, yes, that's a value to us.
So you used a term earlier in your response. You said all things being equal, you'd prefer the additional education, but of course, all things are not going to be equal, and like students are going to respond to the incentives that they face in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And if unless there's some tangible value proposition that enters into the student's objective function, right, then they're just not going to take the fifth year, I think, by and large.
Right.
So one question, and you can answer this, Taylor, and then same question to Mark. Like, do you anticipate additional pay for master's students? Do you anticipate maybe a shorter path to senior? Like, what is it that is going to convince, if anything? Maybe the answer is nothing. But if you do see value in that fifth year, how is that value going to end up in the incentive structure of a student who's currently a sophomore in one of our programs?
Yep. I'll take a swing, Mark, and then you feel free to chime in. I think to me, currently, the biggest value on this master's is because the way we hire it's highly supply and demand centric, right? And so when you're taking that master's course, you're likely doing that internship a year and a half, significant ways ahead of when you'll be hired full time.
Usually junior year for a 5-year program here at Texas. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's pretty consistent amongst all the other schools too. And so, each of our offices is limited to how many we're going to hire in that space. And so all those master students are getting a year's head start essentially on that internship offer, which more likely than not ends up in a full-time offer, barring, other circumstances. So that's one big value I see of getting the master's, of getting in, getting your spot. This is just for the big firms, but and then other than that, I think, all things being equal, yeah, it's different, but I think ultimately, if accounting numbers begin to dwindle or anything like that, or supply and demand, like I said, if there's less supply of jobs, we're going to start recruiting more heavily and more extensively through the master's programs before we go to the undergrads. It works out that way. Now, if we need a ton of people and there's not enough master's students to fulfill those roles, I think that's where the undergrads come into play for us.
Great. Mark, do you want to respond to that same set of questions?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So from our perspective, I mean, we're not Big Four, but we're right there. And it's an extremely competitive environment recruiting, and I think it's
when you say competitive, you mean you're having to compete with other firms to attract
100%
accountants, right? Okay.
Yeah, and if there's fewer, it becomes even more competitive. So this is a door I see. I sit on the advisory board for the University of Houston, and this question has come up, of course, and they've seen their students, entering the program go down, students passing CPA exams go down. So they're like, this is one of the pathways, I think, to try and bolster that. But I think it's too early for us to tell if how much value is there to a master's student versus someone who just has a bachelor's degree, because currently up to this point, everybody had to have the 150 hours, right? So you can't have that compare and contrast directly currently. It will evolve. I think from our perspective, it really will come down to the student and to the candidate. What we see as most important is how ready they are, how prepared they are, how dedicated they are to pass that CPA exam, become a CPA, and longer term career growth. Will somebody taking the master's program inherently build in them that character for their dedication, their responsibilities, some of the soft skills that Mark Beasley mentioned of critical thinking, the analytics? That's where we see the value. But can somebody gain that through the work experience as opposed to sitting in a classroom getting credit hours? I think it's just too early to make that differentiation. We think there's both pathways can lead to successful careers.
So again, going to Taylor and Mark here, some of what you just said made me think about some of my students who have either they've entered McCombs with enough like AP credit as high school students, or there's some sort of double major. It turns out they don't actually have to sit for a master's of accounting, and they can still hit the 150-hour threshold to become a CPA. Surely you have these students in your firms. If I'm sitting at one of your firms trying to decide what my position is on this topic, I could imagine bifurcating my set of employees and saying, hey, do I see any difference between these two groups? To your knowledge, was that done internally at the firms? And if so, do you know what the outcome of that analysis was?
To my knowledge, it has not been done with our firm. I think once, we take our recruiting process obviously very seriously, and it's a gamble, right? You don't always get it right, but we do our very best to hire the best candidates available to us, no matter what they're doing. And I think the internship is valuable. It's very important. It gives you a predicator of how they're going to perform full time. And then once they're in full time, I'll be honest with you, I don't think if I went to other partners in my office here and said, do you know if this person had a master's degree or they just got the 150 hours some other way? Then it's I don't know. Are they performing well in your engagement or not?
Yeah.
So success looks different for each and every one of us. And if there's good coaching involved and teaching and mentoring and acceptance of the feedback, someone's coachable, I think it could be, you won't need to differentiate between whether they have a master's degree or not.
So this is slightly off script. I know you guys got a set of questions ahead of time, but it's just interesting stuff comes up during the course of the conversation. But my mind goes to like, is there a natural limit to this regression in the number of hours we want? So like talking to Mark earlier, he was mentioning that I guess in some states, just unrelated to the 150-hour rule, there is a push to make a bachelor's degree fewer than 120. So make a bachelor's degree 90. And in some of the legislation, and just as background information, I should have said this at the top, but right now I think it's 11 states have actually passed legislation to adopt 120 hours. And the estimates I've seen are that by the end of this year, 2026, it will be 40 states that will have passed similar legislation. Most of it not effective yet, but going effective starting this year. Some of that legislation has been written not as expressly 120 hours, but as you need a bachelor's degree. And so when you combine these two thoughts, plausibly people could be sitting and becoming CPA eligible with 90 hours of post-secondary education. So is that a problem? Where's the sort of natural limit to this? We go from 150 to 120, from 120 to 90. Maybe we're just taking about a high school, like it's an apprentice profession, as is so often said. Do you see a natural limit to this?
I mean, I think for our roles, we will always require, from an interview perspective, for you to be CPA eligible, right? And so what that means for each state may look a little bit differently, but I would imagine I can't foresee anybody going below, the 120-hour bachelor or whatever it is from a bachelor perspective of being able to, sit for the CPA exam and get your years of experience. I think
Let me ask it a slightly different way.
Yep.
If a state was to try to do that, would you see Taylor, Ernst & Young, or Mark, Grant Thornton, would you see your firms, would you predict that they would lobby against that move?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine we would not be in favor of reducing that. I don't know the answer to that.
It's a hard question, and you may not
Yep.
be equipped to answer it, and my apologies for that, but it's just, comes to mind.
I mean, at the end of the day, when I think about those universities or those states that do that, I would think that you'd put those schools at a disadvantage from a competitive standpoint with some of the other ones, because I mean, we're always going to continue, just with, like Mark said, continue to recruit the best and the brightest. And, if we can recruit somebody who has that master's or bachelor's, that's always going to be a priority over others, would be my guess.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that at the same time all this was going on, the group I was a part of, there was a separate group on the Uniform Accountancy Act, which is a sort of a generic document, but it's designed to provide guidance to the states to write their law. And that document now says baccalaureate. It does not say 120. And so states like Virginia, the state of Washington, I think have embraced that new language, which opens the possibility that later on they could define baccalaureate to mean less than 120. They're not doing that yet, but it opens the door that, Nick, you're highlighting that. To time in here, when you look at the public conversation right now about higher ed, it's not super positive. So the value proposition of higher ed, you could see some arguing for, well, 90 is okay. I think what was interesting to me on this joint working group is I never heard any conversation along the lines of protecting the public interest. At some point, what is necessary for the profession to be making decisions that are in the public interest in the regards to the capital markets, that it was more of a practical mobility problem. And let's solve the mobility problem without really thinking about the consequences downstream of what that might mean, which comes back to my earlier points about standard setting is so much more complex, the world we're in, that was the concern. And in a lot of the conversation, many times they heard me on the call say, we sound like we're talking about a trade versus a profession. That was causing me concern, that we're just sort of whittling away this concept of a profession. But obviously I've been in this and I have a lot of vested time in it that you can tell the position I'm on. But
Mark, I'm going to ask you to switch hats here from AAA president and NASBA. I don't even know what your official role is there. What would you call it? You were just a participant on the.
Are you talking about me, Mark?
Yeah.
I was on a working group that was a joint group between NASBA and AICPA.
Okay.
But I was sort of there to try to get an academic voice into that conversation because there was one who really was a practitioner, but he teaches somewhere. But they were just trying to get more academic view on things.
So I'd like you to switch hats to your role at NC State. This audit chat was somewhat provocatively called something like, can we sustain the MPA program? I might reframe that to how can we sustain the MPA program? And I'm wondering what steps you have taken at NC State. You're obviously up on this change. You saw it coming in real time behind the scenes. So what changes are happening at NC State to help sustain the MPA program? Or, one option I could plausibly see a school saying, hey, we're just going to embrace the 4-year bachelor's thing, and we're gonna be the market leader in that space. So what's the strategy at NC State, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. So the first strategy that we've done this before this whole debate was really driving home the value proposition of the masters. That it's more, we have never been a school that's been all about the CPA exam. Rather, we've been about building your professionalism skill broadly defined and just your long-term success. In essence, we've always marketed the program as trying to prepare people to be able to step into the roles that Mark and Taylor are in, leading people as a partner. That's been sort of the focus. Now, that can only go so far into, in a 21-year-old mind trying to make that decision. So the second thing that sort of happened at the same time all this was developing is we really started pushing more on our masters, our online masters program. So we now have a fairly large online program that is mostly geared towards people that are, so we have both in person and online. Let me say, pretty big in person, like 130 for us is pretty big. But then we have probably another 80 or 90 in an online. The online group, I would say, is more career changing people. These are people that I had a student recently that was a violin player in the symphony, social work. They went and got another degree and decided they wanted to make a career shift. And so that's who is large, not totally, but that's a big chunk of our MAC program online now. And we've actually seen a lot of growth in that because people can work their way through it. So it's less costly than the traditional full-time program, but it's allowed new talent to enter the profession that wouldn't have done that. So that's that program. The third thing we've just done is rolled out I think we're calling it 3+1, where we're trying to deal with those people that have a lot of that AP credit you mentioned earlier that come into NC State with already a fair amount of credit hours. So they can start getting into the accounting curriculum pretty quickly and sort of in 3 years get through that to then tack on a year of a master's, which means 4 years. So those three things I think would be all three are what we're trying to do to be competitive.
So the second two seem like fairly, this sounds derogatory. I don't mean it that way, but they seem like obvious plays like that's going to work. I can envision how those would work. I'm really curious about the first option where you said we're just making the value proposition to our students. Mm-hmm. So I'm your student, Mark. Make me the value proposition. What are you saying to these kids?
It's not easy because,
yeah.
When I was that age, I could see maybe 6 months out, and I thought that was forever. I think one of the things we're pointing out that I think is good for this call to focus in on is even though we don't describe our program as CPA prep kind of program, that's not what we're doing. We do say, however, we think you're going to be really prepared for that exam, and we're going to suggest you start thinking about getting some of those sections knocked out before when you start towards your graduation, but before you go work at EY and Grant Thornton. So that they've got a summer after they finish our program. We are pushing them hard to stay in that work mode of study and get that thing done. My concern when I expressed this on that working group was we're going to have people that are only going to have an undergrad in accounting foundation. They're going to immediately go to EY and Grant Thornton and get very busy and be told to study at night. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see, my prediction is we'll see less people successfully passing the exam, and we'll see drops in people attempting to take it. So I think
Yeah.
we're going to see people. I'm concerned that this, because of a 21-year-old having to make this decision, and I can understand their thinking, but they're going to look so short term, and they're going to be 3 years out and really regretting, I can't get this exam done, and therefore I'm going to have to leave EY and Grant Thornton. And so that
Mark
is
Taylor,
ultimately, so we're trying
sorry,
to
I didn't
push
mean to cut you
that
off, Mark.
thought.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how you see that particular angle, the CPA, like actually getting these people to sit and then pass the CPA exam now, probably while they are working full time at your firms. Um, I guess there's enough natural attrition in this profession that maybe this doesn't become a big deal. Like that maybe I don't know, I'm making up numbers here, but maybe we go from 80% of the people at your firms at the staff level passing the CPA exam before they are eligible for promotion to senior to 50%, but maybe only 40% ever get promoted to senior anyway. And so it actually just, it does not binding for you guys. Do you have any insight into what the numbers look like there? Is this going to be a big deal to you?
Let me jump in. So unfortunately, it already is a bit of a problem with some of our people. And for our firm, our policy is you can't be promoted to manager until you're a licensed CPA. So there is some procrastination that can occur. And once somebody becomes a senior, that is when they're incurring probably the most hours in their career.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the most challenging. It's definitely challenging, but I'll say as a partner, I probably have some more challenging days than they do, but they're certainly putting in the most time. And it gets really, really hard, difficult for them to focus on the exam. And even if they do pass a part, it may go past that window and have to redo it again. So we've had some folks unsuccessful that way. So it's already a bit of a problem for certain people. And I think that value proposition is very good, and we need to, as firm leaders, put a little more pressure on these students to knock that out early. And if they're having the schools provide that incentive and the guidance and helping with that, that would help us tremendously. Because I agree, knocking it out early. And we do have a bit of an incentive. There's a monetary incentive for our firm. I think EY has something similar, probably even better than ours. But if we have a candidate who passes the exam or comes in with the exam passed, at least within the first 12 months of employment, there's a monetary bonus. And ours is currently $5,000, which to a young person, that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
Taylor, do you want to add anything?
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a big value proposition of this master's program, because if you think of the undergrad and what that's going to look like, I mean, we as firms still highly value the internship. It's valuable for us to evaluate the students, but it's also valuable to us because we get that labor and that January, February timeframe that's a crunch time, and so it is a value for everybody to get that. And how you squeeze that in to a 4-year program is has to be a significant challenge. And so I envision these students just crushing themselves those 4 years to get that undergrad degree, and weaving the time in to do the CPA review is going to be a significant challenge for them. And so I think that's
probably doing a summer internship. I just don't know how the puzzle works if they're trying to do a spring internship.
Yeah, I mean
with 4 years.
that's going to be a challenge to figure out for, I think, all the universities of, is that possible? Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge, but I do foresee that CPA exam success rates before they start, to Mark's point earlier, being significantly less than what it is now. And then also, once they do start working, that pass rate success definitely decreases. And we have the same rule, 5 years, 4 to 5 years to make manager. So you have that time frame to pass the CPA exam in that time. And so, it'll be a challenge.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of go around the panel here. Let's. I don't know if you guys have kids. If you've got kids, I don't know if they're accountants. let's pretend like you've got a kid who is an accountant and they're a sophomore thinking they want to go into accounting, and they're at a school like Texas who has a 5th year option. Uh, what do you tell them? Do you tell them to take that 5th year, or do you tell them to go work at one of the firms after 4?
Great question. I have a junior right now who unfortunately has chosen accounting as her field of study, much to my trying to persuade her otherwise. I'm just kidding. And we've had these same discussions because she's a junior. She has an internship lined up with another Big Four firm, which I cannot name, which is pretty hilarious, but she was not allowed to work at EY. And so, I mean, that's a real question we're asking internally is, do you pay, at the school she's at, another $40,000 to get your master's? Or, if it's available, do you start earlier, or do what do you do in that year off if you don't have that? And so, I mean, that's hopefully she can get into the UT graduate program and make it a little cheaper for everybody, but we'll see. But that's a conversation we're having real time right now as we work through it.
So unclear to you at this point
It is.
you don't know how it's going to work out. That's
Yeah.
super interesting. I'd love to hear from both Marks on this.
Sure. Taylor's living it, so he has the experience.
Yeah.
My oldest is in high school and needs to start thinking about, she's a sophomore, so I think within the next year we're gonna have to start thinking about going visiting schools and things. But I don't think she has any desire to go into accounting. But if she did, I would likely encourage her to stick with it and get the master's. I think it's a great credential to have, and the experience that she would get out of that would be, I think, valuable. But she's her own person. She might have her own ideas, and I'm not going to force the issue. So it would just be kind of dependent on how prepared she is with everything that she's done. She's a tremendous student right now and involved in lots of extracurricular activities. So maybe she wouldn't need the extra master's program to be successful, but she may want to stick with it because it's more structured and provides that structure to help guide it and get into a good career going forward. So I would likely encourage it, but let her kind of think through it.
Beasley?
Yeah, you could probably predict what I would say, but I would absolutely encourage it. And I have 3 adult children who are long past college. But I will say, just none of them did accounting. But I did have my daughter did do a 5th year program at a different university that was an opportunity just to grab hold of some business kind of education. So we did invest in that way. But back to my teaching side of what I observe at NC State, when I see students in August entering the master's program and then see them at the next May graduation, that level of maturity is very noticeable. There's a sense of confidence. There's just a sense of, I keep coming back to a professionalism. They've worked a lot on communication kinds of skills, both in written. They've had to do so much out of the box thinking. These are not textbook driven classes, but case driven classes. And that, to me, I think puts the graduates coming out of the master's program just on a very solid footing so that when they hit EY, Grant Thornton, and others, they're prepared. I mean, they're ready to go and will be successful. They have all the things to help make them successful. Let me say it that way. The other thing I want to just highlight that when I think about this, and I think I've seen it through the chat a little bit, is I like to think of, if you're 23 when you finish the master's program, which is pretty typical, you probably have 45 years worth of a career. That's a long time to get the leveraging value out of the graduate degree. And to keep in mind, there may be certain moves they will want to make career-wise that in the corporate sector, for example, at certain executive levels, will a master's degree of some sort be a box that will distinguish them? So if I want to be a CFO, do I have to have a master's for a lot of public companies? And the answer, I think, is yes in some cases. And so why shut that door? Or if they ever wanted to be an adjunct professor at NC State, they need a master's. So there are just other doors that they can't see yet, that this will be one obstacle out of the way. It obviously is a $40,000 obstacle for some cases, but I think that return on investment will be there.
Yeah, 40,000 plus the opportunity cost of a salary for that time. So 6 figures all in, almost certainly. It's a large investment. But the point that you raise, I think a lot of students, I'm certain that too many students go to work for Ernst & Young or Grant Thornton and think they're going to make a career there. That's not very on brand for Gen Z. And yet the students in my class often think that, there's a decent shot they could be at one of these firms long term. And so I agree with you that it's maybe just giving them some stats about how many people make it to partner at these firms can reinforce the idea that you're going to want to be able to check those boxes when you turn to some other roles, when you jump ship to be a controller or CFO somewhere. For sure. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add, though, I think it's helpful for us to keep in mind, both Taylor and Mark work with, major global firms. So the level of interest among students to go work at Grant Thornton EY is huge. But think about the next layer or two below those firms, their ability to attract the kind of talent that we're talking about, I think is where we need to not forget about that segment of the market. That what does it look like for them? Something to think
Mark, Taylor, I know, so this is another off the cuff, just occurred to me, but you both work for firms. You're in the audit practice of your respective firms, but both of your firms have a consulting arm. Do you know, is it required in those practices of your firms that you be CPA eligible? Is there incentives to be a CPA in those practices? No?
I can speak for EY. Typically not. I mean, depending on which niche of consulting you're in, a lot of those roles don't require a CPA.
Do your firms target 4-year BBAs for those? Like, we place a lot of MPA fifth-year graduates into those roles, despite the absence of a mandate for that 5th year in those roles.
Yeah.
And so there it is, a sort of a freer market, and yet the market has spoken. They're hiring the 5th-year MPAs.
Yep. No, that's a great point. Yes, we do. We hire everything from undergrads to MBAs, MPAs, to your point, who are typically the MPAs that we hire are much more pushing for that. They're wanting to get in consulting, so they make it very well known that they want to get in there, and so we work with them in that respect. I think from our perspective, you have a high performing student at a high performing school. That's what we're doing. We can teach a lot of that stuff too, and so we want somebody that has the great people skills, great attitudes, and we can teach them some of the other aspects of what we do, and so that's whether that's in consulting or audit or tax or whatnot. That's kind of our target audience from a recruiting standpoint.
That's a great segue actually into the next topic that I want to touch on, which is we're at a transition point in accounting higher ed right now, clearly. And I think a lot of schools, in addition to like targeting different demographics of students, trying to bring in students who are maybe not accounting undergrads, who are doing a career change, and in addition to those sorts of strategies, a lot of schools are reflecting on what is in their curriculum, both at the undergraduate BBA level, with the understanding that maybe that's all some set of our students are going to get before they enter practice, and at what is then in our 5th year, because we're all thinking about that value proposition we're going to try to make, as Mark said. So, Mark, I'm curious what you guys have done at NC State in terms of what goes where in the program, or how you're shuffling things around, if you are. And Mark and Taylor, in what you would see, like if our goal, and I can see this being the goal of a school like Texas, is let's position the MPA that 5th year as a way to get a leg up on the like a ideally like a fast track to senior, or you get some sort of compensation in your paycheck for having that additional education. What can we do as educators to make it worth it for a Grant Thornton or an Ernst & Young to make that deal with our fifth year graduates? What goes into that fifth year? Mark Beasley, yeah, start. If you don't, oh, sorry, I should have given some guidance there. What are you guys doing at NC State?
I will say at this point, we have not made a big adjustment in the undergrad program with the 120-hour change here. That has not driven a change in the undergrad other than this 3+1 that I mentioned. But that's more for those students that have just a lot of AP, IB credit coming in. I think it's going to be a small set right now. Where we are, like everybody, is we're really rethinking that master's program for that value side of things that we're talking about. Obviously, trying to figure out the AI angle of what all AI is meaning to our curricula. So that is where we're putting our energy right now, is on the AI integration. What does that look like? What are the skills? And of course, that's changing like every other hour. But I think part of that, Nick, is because of right now, our demand for the traditional is still very strong. The full-time for a fifth year, plus this online that I talked about for career switchers. So we've sort of got a both and model. And those are strong. Not to say we're going to sit on those laurels at all, but right now we're going to focus on the AI piece for the moment, and see how this works out.
Well, that's we're gonna have a whole nother audit chat about what that looks like, because that's a whole can of worms. But Mark Taylor.
Yeah. So speaking of AI, just my first out the door comment is, you get questions from candidates or just in general public, is AI going to take your job away from you? Are we going to need accountants and CPAs and auditors with AI and technology? And our current response is AI will not replace your job, but the individuals who understand AI and how to best utilize it will. So the challenge for schools would be, how do you stay on top of it, right? As Mark just mentioned, it's changing every other hour. So to try and do the time, effort, money to build a curriculum around it, by the time you've even started, it's changed. So that would be the challenge there. So I think for us, it would be just encouraging students to embrace it and try and get involved and learn whatever they can learn through, whether it's through school or other ways, in an ethical way, of course. But I think I liked what Mark was saying about the case studies, the practical experience. I think those are beneficial to us, to have somebody with a bit of a leg up coming into the work world, of having to go through, in audit in particular, we work in teams. You have to manage different personalities, different work styles, different learning behaviors. You're learning from the people above you that might be trying to teach you in a different way from the way you learn best. So managing those things, I think, through an academic lens that is more practical in nature, can be helpful for them to come into the full-time work environment a little more prepared. So I think that, if in the perfect world you'd have all three, you'd have theoretical, you'd have the practical, you'd have all the soft skills and the critical thinking and the AI. But I know you can't do it all. But in a perfect world, we'd like to maybe have a blend of all of that together.
Yeah, and I would say the beauty of technology advancement is, a couple thoughts on this, because I think there was a question earlier of starting salaries compared to masters versus undergrad. I think the beauty of this is everybody who's starting now as a new staff is doing much, much higher level work than a staff that was starting 5 years ago, even 10 years ago and 15 years ago. So that ramp continues to be there. And I think with AI and the firm's adoptions of AI and our clients' adoptions of AI, I think where you're going to see, it may not be the traditional, you come in as a new staff and we hire for that role and everybody makes, X dollars at that role. There may be differentiated type roles to where, maybe you're more qualified in AI or some other STEM type things that we're looking for. And so maybe those roles will start to change over time based on the qualities of the candidates. And so I think there's some differentiation that will likely happen over time there, that you'll start to see even more benefits of having a master's versus, an undergrad degree, because there will be some differentiated experiences and knowledge that you may have that's much more valuable to a firm, that, when you start, you may, to your point, have a completely different role than what it looks like now.
Yeah, it would not be a call in 2026 if at least a portion of it wasn't dedicated to
Yeah.
AI.
For sure. For sure.
Okay, so we're closing in on 2 o'clock, and my goal was to try and open the floor to questions around this time. I could be on this call all day asking this panel questions. So if there's none that are queued up, then I'm happy to continue. But Jamie, I know I've seen some questions sort of filter in through the chat. So maybe you want to kick us off. Is there questions there you want to read, or do you want to call somebody on mic and we can start to go to audience here?
Yeah, let me try to cover a couple of them because some of them align together. And then if those individuals are on the call and I'm not getting it right, feel free to raise your hand. And just to let you guys know, there's a little virtual hand at the bottom, and that'll kind of put you in the queue so that we know you have something you want to talk about. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit. One of the things I would like to hear the panelists talk more about is, and I think this has come up in some of the discussion, we hear a lot about this shift to skills-based hiring or skills-based performance evaluations.
Competency-based, I think, is what
I
Mark
think
said
it's,
was the language used in the NASBA
yeah, so I've heard
documents.
competency. I know at the audit mid-year meeting, they were talking about skills, and maybe they're the same thing. I know they define them in that panel, but I often wonder, how does that play a role into our master's program? Like, are there skills that we train our people and then they get evaluated in the interview process based on skills, or they're on the job and they're going to be measured on these skills and that's going to drive their raises? I'm just trying to map in, as we kind of tighten up our curriculum, what is it, and talk about the value proposition, how do we tie that into how performance is being evaluated? Or maybe we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll jump in a little bit because of the working group that NASBA AICPA. You're right. We were tasked with creating a competency-based framework. And I think a lot of people on that working group wanted to give it to this crowd, accounting professors, that say, you need to be teaching these things sort of along the lines of, providing a curriculum guide. What struck me was the level of competency skills they were proposing were what I kept calling show up to work skills. These were not challenging skills. And I would be fairly confident that my colleagues on the call would say, yeah, I'm doing this in the class. So they were struggling to figure out what are those competencies, but what they landed on the exposure draft, which you can go get and see, some of us were of the view, these are low hanging, the bar is low. So it wasn't, to me, helpful at all from a curriculum design. That doesn't mean there couldn't be one. I just was going to say I keep saying I was a part of the group, but I was on the opposing side is the way to say it. That it was interesting to see them try to articulate what those competencies are. That could be measurable too. That was the challenge.
Yeah. So related to that, one of the other questions that came up was in our current curriculum, do we have formal structures where we teach for the CPA exam? I think we talked a little bit about opening up time for the students to be able to pass the CPA exam. But I would also argue there's content coverage that's covered on the CPA. I know I open up my class with 2 goals, or I have 3 really, but one of them is I want you to be able to be a really good professional and to have an intelligent conversation with a partner and to be good at your job. And then, part of what we're going to cover in class is some CPA content because you need to pass the CPA exam. But, when I think about it, like, is it formalized? Like, is there also a value proposition in our content? And I guess maybe this is a question to Mark, and I guess I can get to Taylor, the other Mark, Mark G soon, but how do you feel about your NC State program?
I would say our NC State program is the way you described yours, in that we are trying to teach people to be incredibly successful at a partner level, CFO level. So that vision, that's where we're trying to get them. And we're going to cover some pretty rigorous content. We convince ourselves that they're going to be pretty prepared because of what we're talking about, but we don't set up a class with, okay, we're going to talk about this because the CPA exam covers this, and we're going to carve out and have some tests to let you practice. We don't do any of that. We do, I guess the structure we provide is some coaching on, hey, your fall semester coursework ties into one of the sections. So during the break, you might want to go ahead and sit for that one section. And then after your spring semester, those of you on the call that know Scott Showalter, they all have to go through his advanced auditing class. We're like, take auditing in May after you finish, and then knock out the other two in June, July. So we're coaching them on timing, but it's not about CPA exam prep for us. That has not been our marketing strategy, I guess is the way to say it.
Okay. And then I got one for Mark, the other Mark and Taylor. Um, I don't know how to phrase this, so forgive me if I'm not phrasing this as well as I could. It's, we talk about the value, we've talked a little bit about the value proposition, but I'm just trying to think back to when I was an undergrad and I had to get the master's degree. I'm glad I got it because that was the year I actually learned something. But if I were to do it again, do it over again, and someone said you don't have to get it, and the firms aren't going to pay me more to get it, and didn't grow up from a family with a lot of money, I'm probably not going to get it. So my concern is that, there are going to be students out there that are not going to choose a master's degree. And then over time, we may have fewer people getting the CPA exam passed. We may have people doing public accounting with an introductory tax class, an introductory audit class. And then, yeah, they can learn on the job. And I fully agree you learn on the job. There is a lot I learned in practice. But at what point, like, is there ever a concern from the firms of the talent pool coming in and it or becoming a lower quality and then we have to readjust? Or is this not a concern? It's just like me being overly biased toward education.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, Taylor, but I'll jump in real quick and say, we are reminded, it seems like every day, by our regulators that quality is job one, right? So the PCOB continues to raise the bar, move the goalposts, whatever you want to call it, to say, hey, audit firms, your quality is good enough. It still needs to improve. And we think our quality is improving every day. Now, translate that into the recruiting process and the students and the caliber of the candidates that come in over time, that could make it harder for us. A lot more handholding, a lot more on the job training, a lot more of us as partners having to dip down to make sure that quality is there. That is concerning. If that comes to fruition, that is something that over time, we saw it actually through COVID, right? With all this virtual work, remote work. And the first knee-jerk reaction was, oh my God, we closed our doors. More of the boomer partners were like, how are we ever going to get anything done? If we're not having people come in. Well, actually, remarkably, we got a lot done, and we got a lot done, even more done, because people had nothing else to do. But the quality over that period of time, because of the not having the on-the-job training and not being able to sit shoulder to shoulder as a team, we saw after a couple of years, those that started in that environment, or maybe probably even finished school in that environment remotely, when they became eligible to be promoted to senior, were they ready? Did our senior talent pool go down a bit? We saw that. So now we're kind of back to work mode, back in office, back in person, and we're seeing those trends improve. But if the bachelor's program is one that's eligible for CPA without the master's, we might start to see those types of trends again, where they're just not having the right experience coming in the gate, and the quality could go down again.
Okay, so one more, and then I'll close off my rambling over here because I think most of the others were kind of talked about. But there was a question that came across about generative AI and like large language model skills. And how do we cram that into, I think that this is rephrasing, but how do we cram that into a curriculum that's getting shrunk? And so like we talk about like skills or students needing to have critical thinking and like at least being familiar with technologies because technology is always changing, but we want to see them adaptable and able to use it. But it seems like the ask, there's always more to do or more to fit in the classroom, and now we're going to have less time. And so I don't know what the answer there is, but like if, maybe Taylor and Mark Gibbonus, if you had a pick of what you wanted us to put in the curriculum, what would you say? I mean, case studies, I think I heard, but like
Yep.
what else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think we're all adapting as quickly as we can on this, and I think you all are no different. And so I would imagine at some point each one of your classes that apply anything related to accounting and auditing and tax are going to be incorporating AI pretty significantly. And so it may drive efficiencies, to be honest, in some of your teachings of allowing students to learn at a quicker pace on some of this stuff because the data and the information that is there for them immediately is off the charts. And we're seeing that just in basically year one, year two of using this stuff is the ability to get the right answers of research and accounting and whatnot is literally at your fingertips versus having to go search for things previously. And so I would just think through all of your curriculums in each of your classes of how you kind of weave AI into the existing framework that you have and just making it part of the day to day. Because I think that's what we're doing, and that's what we're going to continue to do and at a much higher pace moving forward. I don't know if that answers your
Well,
question, Jamie, but that's just what comes to my mind.
I'd like to rephrase Jamie's question or
Yep.
her summarization of some of the stuff on the chat. So you guys teach a lot of stuff on the job. I remember I was at Deloitte. First 2 weeks was just literally classroom. And then the first year was really a classroom. It just happened to be at a client site. I mean, I was just soaking stuff up, right? Um, what do you find is the hardest stuff for you guys to teach in that environment where people are on the client, they have to be billing hours. Uh, what is the pain point for you that we might be able to solve as educators where we get their full attention in a classroom that's actually the whole point is learning?
Yep. I have strong views on this. So, Mark,
Please.
I'll jump in and you feel free. But I think for me, number one by far and away is interpersonal skills and presentation skills and soft skills and ability to, what we have, our inventory is our people, and we're walking billboards each and every day at walking the halls of our clients. And if we're not able to have those conversations with them, even just day-to-day conversations, not audit, not tax, just getting to know them as people, that's becoming much, much more of a challenge with what we're doing virtually and everything. And so, we're trying to stem the tide there of turning it around and making our people much more in person together with your team, working within a team. And I know that's all very soft and touchy-feely and not necessarily as concepts and application of accounting, but I see that each and every day as a challenge with our younger folks.
That's super informative. That's really good info. Mark, you agree?
I agree with all that. Also, a couple of additional thoughts. Just the phrase intellectual curiosity and being curious about things. And then the critical thinking. I keep going back to that because you can, as you develop and grow, particularly as an auditor, there's professional judgments involved and some critical thinking, connecting the dots. You can teach a task. You can teach somebody how to do a task. Here's your assignment. Here's how you do it. Give them an example to work from. They can do it. But then connecting the dots. Okay, now what have I done? And does it make sense? And does this explanation for this particular piece over here really make sense with what I know over here? And being able to make those intellectual connections, because that's where I'm writing probably most of my review notes and comments. I was okay, this doesn't really make sense. Did you think through this? That's the thinking part of it.
Yeah.
That I think is the hardest to teach, of the critical thinking.
It's interesting as I listen to that, I have a very biased how I hear it, but I'm hearing you say we need the fifth year. To be honest, because I'm thinking I need the third and fourth year to say, here's how you spell audit, here's what an assertion is, here's what evidence is. The fundamentals. I need to, how do I tie my shoe? I need to learn that first, and then I can start doing that. And I think what we've carved out, back to the topic, is what y'all just described, which the burden will be on academics on the call to figure out, still, given the realities, how do I somehow get that into the third and fourth year?
Yeah.
And to the extent that it's not possible to do it, maybe the market does sort this out, right? So
Correct.
maybe students come out before years just noticeably different than the ones that come out in 5.
Yeah.
And then, the market will
Adjust.
recognize that.
And I think that will be the case. I think there is value in that fifth year. And I think what Mark said is spot on. Is when I look back and I talk to recruits, that fifth year is spent on those higher level concept classes, working in groups, doing presentations. It's hard to get that all squeezed into those 4 years. And so I do see a value there.
And the additional, you have the 2-year apprenticeship, if you will, to get the CPA license. I don't, as an associate, you're not getting the presentation skills, the more interpersonal type of skills. You're more task oriented in those first couple of years, to be honest. And so you're not going to benefit from that additional year of experience in those types of ways.
Kayla has raised her hand. Feel free to come on mic, Kayla. What's your question?
Hey, can you guys hear me all right?
We can.
There we go. Hey, Taylor, good to see you again. So, no, we got a chance as the advisory council to kind of talk about a lot of this stuff. And it's nice to have that meeting from 2 months ago to hear where the discussion was, leave and come back. And we've thought about that. And so I'm an audit partner at Forvis Mazars in Woods, Texas. But just thinking about the content of the program, I mean, definitely the fifth year is a place for students to pass the exam. And we are seeing so many students come into their careers not having, they're trying to be good careerists and learn something brand new and try to work 8 hours a day. And, oh, no, wait, no, we told you 50 hours for the spring, but by the way, pass the exam too. And so the amount of pressures that you're already coming out trying to be a good careerist is really tough. But I think one of the things that I was really reading about, we talk about AI. I mean, I was just talking to one of my teams earlier, they're like, we can't get this data to work. And I said, have you used AI? Have you leveraged it? Have you tried? And so those are the first things that I'm like, okay, how do we make the students come out knowing how to navigate that? But I read an article that's talking a lot about initiative and what is the initiative that people are coming into the workforce for? Are they task takers or are they work takers? Like, are they saying, I'm going to do the extra 2 or 3 steps to get this? So much about this job now is the ability to communicate, because we show into every single audit and the client knows more than us. They have all the data that we need to be able to accomplish our job. And if we aren't good communicators to get that from the client, I can't make informed conclusions. I can't deliver good client service. I can't know how I'm performing. And so really that fifth year, I think with all of the different studies, it's how do we teach people to take initiative? How do we teach them to, hey, what's that one extra thing that you can do, rather than saying, the partner asking, hey, did you send an email to this client? We need these documents. And they just said, yep, I just sent one. And then I don't want to come back in a week and ask and say, did you get it? And they're like, nope, but I'll email again. Well, why not take the initiative to try to make sure you're chasing it down? And those types of soft skills. My fifth year was my favorite year at Texas because I thought it was so focused on soft skills and interpersonal communications and working with other people to get the data that you need. So that, in combination with the CPA exam, I think makes the students so much better. And me working with interns and sitting in conference rooms with them right now, like, I can tell very quickly if they don't communicate well. And I'm immediately thinking, like, can we put them in front of a client? So I think that's the fifth of just honing in so deep on those types of things. And the value proposition is pass your exam, like get it done, study with your friends. And
Kayla, so remind everybody you're at Forvis, is that right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I keep hearing this word value. You
Yeah.
said, yeah, I really do think that fifth year is valuable. I
Yeah.
understand it's early days, but like when I tell a student that the fifth year is valuable, they see dollar signs. That's what they see when I say the word value.
Yeah.
So like the same question to you as somebody at one of the firm that's not like in the top six. Does that convert somehow for students at Forvis? Are you going to pay master students more? Do they get a faster track to senior? Do they get a boost to their salary because they've already passed the CPA exam? How does that work, or does it?
So it's a lot of what you've heard already. It's very similar right now. Now, where we see a lot of that is you get bigger CPA exam bonuses if you pass it sooner. I also would say a fourth year student trying to get a job right now at a public accounting firm in the next 6 months is probably pretty hard to find. A lot of those
Mm.
positions are filled at this point. And so then you start thinking about the timing of your internship. Okay, if I do it in the spring, is that job going to be like, if I do it in the spring of my senior year, is that job going to be waiting for me in the summer? Or how does that work? I would also say that as a fifth year or a fourth year, if you go and you aren't able to pass your exam, internships are no longer guaranteed job positions. And what happens if you don't get hired from that internship and then you don't have your CPA exam? How marketable can you be out to the market otherwise? So there's still some risk in there for sure of a student that's not getting their fifth year just from the job market. But I right now we're not at the point that we're going to be increasing comp for a fifth year versus a fourth year, but we are going to be seeking those fifth years likely more so than the fourth years when we're trying to hire people.
I see Brandon's hand raised here. I do worry, like I know in a lot of fields, what often happens is a student will go onto the job market with a 4-year degree. They will not do well on the job market. And so those that don't do well will stick around for a master's year because their option set looks thin. And what I really don't want to happen is that a fifth year becomes a signal of somebody who is struggling in the 4-year program. Anyway, I'll just put that out into the ether because I'm a
If you
masochist.
have a quality in which you do have a quality MPA program, they're going back to get those skills that are going to make them even more approachable to the market. So
That's the hope.
yeah.
Yeah. Brandon, why don't you come on, Mike, and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Brandon Servo from the University at Buffalo. And kind of leading right into this was my question of like, how do we reconcile students when they generally get their offers during their junior year, but we're trying to separate them based on skills they're going to learn 2 years later? So it's like, I just don't know how to kind of speed up time, if you will, sort of saying, hey, you're going to be judged based on whether or not you might have these skills as a master's, but we're going to hire you 2 years before, in which case there's no separation at that point.
Well, I guess another way to put this question, if I hear you right, Brandon, is so you've got a student who is an intern and you're going to give them an offer. Is your offer conditional on a fifth year? If they come to you and say, should I go for the fifth year or not? What advice as people at the firms are you giving those students? Is it blanket? Is it student specific? Where do they go for that advice?
Yeah, certainly part of it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's a great question and great thoughts. And it kind of goes back to my original comment on this is, you know, when we're making these offers and for these interns, and to your point, there are 2 years down the road of full time. I mean, that is a huge benefit for them of getting that offer at that time because there's a finite number of full-time offers that we're going to give out. Let's say we're going to give out 20, and we try to get 20 interns to meet, that 20 full-time students. And so if we fill those 2 years ahead of time, and those are with students that are going through the master's program, they've essentially locked in their spot there. I think somebody may have had another question of, okay, what if they go through that internship and then they want to start that fall and skip their master's? At that point, we haven't encountered that yet, but at that point, likely that fall start group is going to be full. And so, that's where it becomes this timing challenge especially for the undergrads, because they're going to be trying to do some level of internship and wanting to start full time when, in essence, when they graduate with the 4-year degree, that fall start group will be full with the prior year's master
So
intern.
this is a short run sort of friction on, and this actually, Jamie and I, before the call started, we're talking about this a little bit, that there's likely not a cliff because there are these frictions to sort of migrate in. Even if the firms were to say, we really would prefer just 4-year students,
Yeah.
it's still going to take a couple, 2 or 3 years for that to sort of shift to happen, which is good. It gives us time to sort of adjust. And then hopefully, as we've been discussing, that's actually not the end state. And we do show that there's this value in that 5th year, such that that's where most of the hiring happens, or there is some market response to that 5th year.
Something to keep in mind, I think, which ties a little bit into Brandon's question. I think when students are going through an internship and they're seeking that input about what to do, the input is often, I don't think it's Taylor and Mark they're talking to. They're talking to a person 2 years older than they are, and who might be maybe a senior. And my concern is that advice might be, don't do it. Just go in and start working.
Yeah.
But that person hasn't been far enough along to see maybe how, when they become a partner, how valuable it was. And I actually had that happen with a student. Thankfully, he interned with a big firm, decided to bag doing a master's, and it was because he talked to people on the engagements he interned with. Gratefully came and had some other conversations separately, but enrolled late in the fall because he decided to come back, because he was getting mixed signals with that. And I think a lot of the advice was coming from people that are not much older than he. And I'm not sure that's the best source for that decision.
It's a little bit of a catch-22, going back to the beginning of the call, Mark, because if you've been out for so long that you look back on your own 5th year or undergraduate, maybe you don't see the value, but
that's true.
Okay, so Jamie's got her hand up. It's 2:22, so we've got maybe 1 or 2 questions that I assume Jamie's going to summarize. And then I think Jamie's going to bring us home with some announcements at the end here. I may drop off the call just 2 minutes before 2:30 to make another appointment. But Jamie, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we're running out of time, and I want to get to something that I'd like to ask the audience, so the other academics on the call, if anybody can just quickly get on mic and say what's your value proposition? Because I think that's where we can learn from each other. And I'll just start and say mine is people come back to school to get an MBA, and they do it for a reason. And I think the MPA is actually a better degree personally. But I think you're in school, get the degree done, you're going to get the CPA passed. It's going to set you up. And I think someone made this comment in the chat. It's for your second job, maybe, where you can have that master's degree and a CPA certification. You're setting yourself up for your future, because you're not just thinking about the first job. So I guess if there's anybody out there that is just really here's my value proposition I give students, I would love to hear it. And I know there are some people in MPA offices sitting on this call thinking about marketing the value proposition and would like to hear that. We only have about 5 minutes, 6 minutes to do it. But yeah, if you could raise your hand, or if anybody has any thoughts, I would love to hear it. And Kayla, I'm going to unspot you.
That's dangerous, Jamie, because it's a really hard question and you might get crickets. We'll see.
I'm sure we are academics. I am not worried about that. Maybe I should be, but
Jamie, this is Gary McGill. Basically, I just want to ditto what you just said. I put it in the chat as well. That you're gonna, you're in school mode. You're already here. You're already in an integrated. We have an integrated 3-2 program, so people are already in the master's program before they finish their bachelor's. You're already here. You're already doing it. You're going to get the CPA exam knocked out. Most of our students have passed the CPA exam before they start on the first day on their job. We have experience of that. We have our students our former students telling our current students that same story. And also this eventually, I mean, our master's programs, other than accounting, are busting at the seams. Everybody wants a 1-year master's degree other than an MBA. And they also, many want the MBA. So obviously there's a great demand for having that master's degree, for credentials, for current and future jobs, particularly future jobs. And so you're already here. One more year, get it done while you're in the mode of being a student. And I'm also convinced that master's degrees will have a premium on starting salaries in about 2 to 3 years once the transition takes place. I think there will be premiums paid just like there were when I started school. Sorry, you got camera fell over. There will be premiums paid eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah, what about scholarships? This was brought up on the chat. And are there any, I don't even know what scholarship opportunities we have for the master's program, but I think that's one of the hard things. Like they're paying a lot of money instead of making money. And so it's not just, it's like double whammy of like you're 18, 20, I don't even know how old they are, right? But you're trying to consider you're financially strapped. I think that's hard. Do we see any increases in scholarships offerings anywhere? I don't know.
Are you talking about from the firms, Jamie?
Either way, like if you're someone from a school that you've got more inflows coming in, or if you're a firm, would you ever sponsor anybody? That's,
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's a good question. I'm not aware of any.
Jamie, we were
Well,
just
we
talking
know that we've got
about
wasn't KPMG doing essentially paying for a cohort of data analysis specialists, people that were going to start at their firm. Actually, I wish we had somebody from KPMG on the call because it'd be interesting how they see that program in light of the move to 120 hours.
we just
And
had a
Aaron's got his hand up, maybe
conversation.
related.
We just had a
Yeah.
conversation with Christina and Steve and some of the others, specifically about our spending to the university to gear more towards possibly sponsorships, or I mean scholarships for students, because we've been giving kind of just to the university in the past,
Mhm.
but not a lot of direction. And we do value that program. So we're like, let's direct it towards that, support the MPA program, the 5th year, and the students and the cost. So that's one of those ways. So maybe we're not paying more upon hire with the 5th year, but we are trying to push some money towards scholarships and navigating that conversation.
Nice. Nick, why don't you bow out? I know you have another important call and I can wrap us up. But Aaron, why don't you go ahead and go?
Yeah, it was real quick. I was just going to say Deloitte has a program also that our university participates in